Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. I'm just checking to see why I hear certain things going on in the background on my end. There we go. Um, and it's kind of strange. Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. But I'm just checking. There we go. Everything should be working okay now. Now, there's always a little bit of a delay. It always feels like the Twilight Zone to me. But that is just kind of the way it is, and I hope there'll be folks joining us. We're going to be dealing with one of the most controversial sections in Matthew, and also a transition section in Matthew. This really transitions between what's coming as far as Jesus' teaching being gathered by Matthew and the part that we were just in. So I'm just doing a little fiddling here for a split second, just to make sure that everything is going okay. There we go. I like to get everything kind of situated, and I've been doing that, but I find that things keep changing. The new interface does have its interesting, unique situations. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go to the PowerPoint. We're going to be in Matthew 5:17 through 20. So if you have your Bibles, you can go ahead and turn there. It's not a large pericope, but it's a key pericope, and it's a controversial pericope, both within the Jewish believing community. Obviously, it will be seized upon by folks like Tovia Singer, and then it's controversial even in the Christian community, and I'm not sure that it's always dealt with correctly or well. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the PowerPoint, make sure that that's up and running. And good, everything looks good there. And then I'm going to go ahead and drop this and get that up and going. You can see the picture and where we're going to be. At least you should be able to in a second here. I'm not quite sure why you don't. There we go. And so that's where we're going to be. I I always fiddle around. I like to try and make the backgrounds look a little better. So that's why I ended up doing that. Um, we do need to be aware that one of our broadcasts is going to fall during Thanksgiving. And so what I want to do is just do a little high. But I have to let you know that I will be doing turkey coma, turkey, and other things on Thanksgiving. And so if, aside from the high, you'll just have to look for it. It'll probably be on Get Vogue. I may try to put the link up so that some of you guys can come on and we could just talk and wish each other a happy Thanksgiving. And that's on top of the incredible Thank Patreon Day. Speaking of thanking people, first of all, thank you to all the folks who support us through CPM. But let me go ahead, put that promise up. There are folks who have decided to support us a different way, and I want to acknowledge them. You will see that if you support us through CPM, we are incredibly thrilled, but we also want to acknowledge the Patreons who really want to see this material. Um, some folks just get natural, honorable mention, and so I can't thank everybody who supports us through CPM on the air because that list would be too big and it would require several slides. That's done through thank you letters and other means. This is for the folks who don't support us through Chosen People, but they're still really a part of the team. And I want to acknowledge them anyway and acknowledge them also. So, anyway, and also. So, we're going to go ahead and do that. Again, every so often I'm getting this warning so that I'm hoping I'm not losing speed, but all of a sudden the health dropped. I don't know who's in the neighborhood and who's doing what, but hopefully that will clear itself up. You guys can let me know if it gets really a bumpy ride. So I'm going to go back to this, and let's trust that this improves. We don't have a lot of folks on yet, so if it does get bumpy, you can kind of let me know. We're on Cox Internet here, and we have the evening, and so hopefully it will all work out. Let's get going here. So let me kind of drop this and pull that over there, and let's get going on our thing. Messiah and his relationship to the law, or the way I phrased it is, what is Messiah's relationship to the law? And I'm going to go to this first PowerPoint. There we go. Now, if you have Matthew 17 through 20, you can go ahead and pull that up and be ready, but it's going to be up on the screen. Also, if there are more people watching, I don't know, it might mean that some of you are going to get drop off and others won't. So I'm not quite sure how YouTube works that. But if you have your Bibles, you can use that, or you can use the text on the screen there. Do not think I've come to destroy the law of the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, all heaven and earth will pass away, but not one jot or tittle will by no means pass away from the law until all is fulfilled. Whosoever therefore breaks the least of these commandments and teaches other men so shall be called least in the kingdom of heaven, and whosoever does and teaches them shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. This forms an important bridge between the Beatitudes and the Similitudes and the giving of what I call the Torah of Messiah, or at least the beginning of the Torah of Messiah, in the rest of Matthew. So Matthew's going to contrast the teaching that exists in his day rabbinically with his own teaching. Now, let me be real clear about this. I do not necessarily, and some other folks are here, which is great. I do not necessarily. I want to be really balanced tonight. Okay. Jesus is making comparisons between what the people heard, but he's also giving authoritative instruction, and that's what the word Torah means. And so we're going to have to try and walk through this balance together. I'm going to make parties on both sides very unhappy tonight, because it would really be easy just to take a hardline approach that nothing's carried over, or a soft line approach that everything in the Mosaic Law is carried over. And that's really what people are really kind of pulling towards, and they're always pulled towards this. We're going to take a look at this, but I'm sure that I'm not going to make everybody happy. I don't mean necessarily you, but if my friends from the Hebrew Roots movement or even parts of the Messianic Congregation movement saw this, and watched it, they might not be totally thrilled. On the other hand, even though I am of a dispensational thought in that I believe Israel and the church are separate, and I do believe that there's a program for Israel in the future, and I do not believe it's necessarily the same as the church, because Israel as a people nation will experience some things that the church won't. So I would call myself in the dispensational camp, or dispensational, but I'm not a Schofieldite by that stretch of the imagination. That's a little too tight, and so I'm not there either. Um, and so even there, I don't necessarily correspond real well to anybody. I believe there's a continuity, and we're going to see that, but I don't believe it's a carryover. So let's take a look at this and start unpacking it a little bit here. Okay. Knotty problems. Fulfill cannot simply mean give the meaning or explanation as some claim. Now, this is terribly popular in the Hebrew Roots movement, and it can't do that. It also can't mean destroy. As Michael Brown points out, there is a contrast here. Okay. So they have to be in contrast to each other, fulfill and destroy. So Jesus can't be saying that destroy is the same as fulfill. What I'm saying is there's a dichotomy here. whenever there's a dichotomy, there's a tension. Okay. And so we're going to be looking at this. I see some faces I haven't seen for a while, so but just to let you know that no, I'm not real normative in the sense of being where other people would probably prefer to have me be. So I think I've said enough on that. Let's start digging with it. So I can't just come down on fulfill means to do away with in entirely in all its principles. Um, let me, I'll kind of give my take. Let's look at why fulfill can't simply mean an explanation. Okay, and this is real popular in the Hebrew roots movement and that site we saw. Okay, Jesus can't be saying that fulfill means to give the fill up the meaning of. I really dislike that. Or to give the full meaning of, or to explain. Allah, uh, plerosai is the Greek there. And then you have the other phrase, panta ginetai. Okay. And the usage of Matthew won't allow. Now, when you see a phrase in the Bible that's in a particular section, okay, how do we define that word? Well, we look up the Greek meaning or the Hebrew meaning, but there'll be a range of meanings there. So, how do we deal with that? Well, the way we deal with that is, first of all, we look at the surrounding usage, and we also look at the usage within that particular writing. So you start with the unit, and then you look at the usage in that particular writing, and you may want to pay special attention to the usage before the usage you're looking at. In other words, this is like a really wild concept, but it's absolutely a really good Bible study sort of thing to pay attention to. The author's telling us what the word means in the verse we're looking at through how he's used it previous to the verse we're looking at. And then you also would look broader at the author's writings. In the case of Paul, we have a corpus of Paul's writings, and we will look how Paul uses that particular word in that particular setting, then in that epistle, maybe even particularly before the usage we're looking at. And then we would go ahead and we look at the Paulinian writings. So, how does Paul tend to use that word? And then the rest of the canon. Now, that gets a little systematic. It's not violating biblical theology because as we look at the rest of the canon, we might see what concepts that word's tied to. So we would definitely wouldn't ignore that, particularly if it's a concept that develops. But remember, we're talking about a word, and a given concept may have different words associated with it. So when you look at biblical theology, you might look at how the concept develops and then look at the words and see how they're used. And even historically, as we're looking at the meaning of a word, we might want to see how that word was historically used in other writings. When I'm looking at a Greek word, I will actually look at its secular usage. If I'm looking at a Greek word in the New Testament, I'm going to look at the Septuagint equivalence. What Hebrew word was translated by that Greek word? And sometimes you can't find one. Let's look at how Matthew uses the word fulfill prior to this section. Okay. The same Greek root is used. Now, remember that word is pointed based on its usage, gender, number, things like that. Particularly if we're talking about verbs, if it's a participle, it could be its tense. So when I say the key, the root, I'm going back to the very root of that word, not inflected. We use the term inflected to indicate how the word is being affected by how it's being used in the context and grammatically connected to the audience. Okay? The same Greek root is used in Matthew 1, verse 22, in which it states the virgin birth happened in order to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet. In fact, in Matthew 2, whenever prophecy is uttered, the same Greek word is used in order to indicate that the prophecy was fulfilled. So the interpretation of the word fulfilled in Matthew, that's section 17 through 20, cannot mean simply to fill up the meaning of. If we read it that way, and we read Matthew 1:22, that the virgin birth fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet, behold, a virgin shall conceive, then what we would have to believe is that the virgin birth existed for no other reason than to explain to us what virgin birth looked like. In other words, the virgin birth didn't actually happen. Mary conceived virginally not to fulfill a prophecy, not that a prophecy would actually occur, but rather simply to tell us a little bit about birth, which is an absurdity. In Matthew 2, where Michael has talked about consistently the term in order that the prophecy might be fulfilled, you mean in order that the prophecy might be fulfilled, but nothing really happened. Well, that's an absurdity too. So, looking at the context of the way Matthew uses the word fulfilled before Matthew 5, it cannot necessarily mean simply to give the meaning of. Well, let's look at some other explanations given, okay? Another alternate explanation, and Liebenberg uses this, is that the word fulfilled means simply obeyed. But that's not Matthew's intent. Matthew's intent is not to teach that Jesus obeyed the virgin birth or that Mary obeyed the virgin birth. In what sense did Joseph obey the virgin birth? It doesn't fit the authorial intent. Folks, if it doesn't fit the authorial intent, it isn't what's being said. An exegetical basis for restricting the term fulfilled to establish the proper interpretation or even to display the full meaning is absent. I had already said that, but it bears repeating. Clearly, the virgin birth was predicted long ago by other prophecies into and was completed, and it wasn't a matter of obedience. Actually, Mary didn't necessarily obey the virgin birth. She simply acquiesced and accepted God's will. Okay, but she didn't cause herself to be born virginally. Joseph didn't cause the virgin birth, or it wouldn't be a virgin birth to begin with. I included the paragraph because it's out of my very dissertation material. Okay. What about a special rabbinical usage? Now, this is where Brad Young and some from the Jerusalem school come off. Now, there's some good material there. I'm looking at it in terms of establishing Paul's credentials for a later broadcast, and not everything Brad Young says is bad. His grasp of Hebrew is very good, and he's out of Jerusalem University, but I think he goes too far. And so he suggests that it's a rabbinical usage. Okay? It's restricted specifically to a rabbinical usage, and fulfill has to do with uphold the correct meaning of. So if you uphold Torah, it's fulfilled, destroyed, katalasso. I think it's katalasso, but I don't have the word in front of me. Would have the idea of destroying as opposed to upholding the correct meaning. Now, here's the thing. We're back at authorial intent. Matthew's gospel isn't written just for rabbis. He isn't talking to the Pharisees at the time, so we have no reason to believe that the authorial intent is restricted simply to a rabbinical meaning of. I like this line. If the verse makes, when the plain sense makes good sense, make no other sense, or the result is nonsense. Or the way I learned it is, if the verse makes sense, make no other sense, or you end up with nonsense. That is the way we should read the Word of God on a general level. Now, if deeper study gives us insight into the background, which helps to change things, which is consistent with the passage itself, the context of the passage itself, the historical background of the passage itself, okay, it doesn't violate authorial intent, there may be more information there. But new information that sheds light on the passage will not violate the authorial plain sense intent of the passage. Okay? Now we're in a position. Now, a really good book, I think I can pull it out and show it to you. I'm going to try to. It's expensive. I think you can look it up. Maybe I can do that at the end of the broadcast. Okay, I'm holding this up. This book is the Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels. And so I'm kind of hoping that will show. It's a huge volume. It's InterVarsity Press. Look at the editors on this. This is Joel B. Green, Scott McKnight, and Marshall. Okay, excellent. It has a whole section on the law and Jesus. A very well done section. By the way, they were the editors. The section on the law and Jesus was actually done by Douglas Moo, who is quite the scholar. And so, what is said about that? Now we are in a position to summarize Jesus' teaching about the law with 4 prepositions. There are weightier matters to the law. One needs to penetrate beyond the law's letter to its original intention. One needs to penetrate beyond the action to the character, and it is possible to take the view of the law because the kingdom has arrived. Now, the kingdom has arrived means the kingdom has been inaugurated but has not been established. This is the already but not yet eschatology. So are we in the Messianic age? The Messianic age has been inaugurated, but it has not been established. There are some things that needed to be in place. The church is part of that plan. And so that's why that's there. That's page 20 of Jesus and the Gospels, quoted extensively in some of my work. And Douglas Moo has done an incredible job. A few of his works have dealt with that. 4 Views of the Law and Gospels also is a section by Douglas Moo. Look at those 4 basic prepositions. They're going to be kind of a structure. Okay, first of all, we're going to see there's a hierarchy in the law. Second, we have to get to the divine intention. That goes back to seeing what God's character is in relation to the law and what he desires for us, how he desires us as image bearers to reflect that. One needs to penetrate beyond action to character. Now, this is a real problem, okay? Because all the focus generally tends to be in doing the mitzvot. This is just another place where I and Singer would have problems. The real beauty is seeing what's behind the action to the character, not just the action itself. And so, as we're dealing with these premises, we're going to start fleshing this out. I now know why abbreviations are used on the internet. So, let's get that going and go to the next slide. Okay, understanding the Torah, understanding the spirit of Torah, penetrating its intent, the case for a hierarchy, the pattern of Torah, and an example are the way we're going to go through this. So let's talk about the hierarchy. I keep going back to this. Okay. The hierarchy has to do with the way the law works, and I'm going to prove that essentially Jesus believed in a hierarchy within the law. The 2 greatest commandments, the 10 words or commandments. Notice I didn't say just the 10 commandments. Jews don't call it the 10 commandments. They call it the 10 words. Okay? Let me say something. It's very, very easy for Christians to spend all their time trying to go ahead and focus on the 10 commandments. The 10 commandments are an extrapolation of expanding the 2 greatest commandments. Before, if you're going to have a child learn the 10 commandments, why not start by having them learn the two greatest commandments and teach them that if they keep the two, they'll keep the 10? In fact, Paul mentions that love does no harm to its neighbor, therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. So, what I did is I took the 10 commandments and I took the two great commandments and I overlaid them so you could see how they relate to each other. Okay? And that to me is the spirit of Torah. That is the spirit of the commands in the 5 books of Moses. Now, can I do this with everything? No, but I can certainly do it with the 10. So if you don't have the PowerPoint, get the PowerPoint because these graphs, they're almost like infograms, but they're not quite that neat. Okay? As far as loving God, you have 4 commandments listed. So the first 4 commandments are extensions of loving God. As far as loving your neighbor, you have the other 6. So the 2 explain the 10. Okay, if you're keeping the spirit of Torah, you are keeping the Torah in that sense. I mean, that's a really wild concept, but I think that really needs to be the entire focus. Keeping mitzvot apart from the spirit of Torah is non-Torah. That's why when I listen to Singer way off sometimes I don't see a lot of love. Okay? Love may be truthful, but it isn't cruel and it rejoices in the truth. It is not dishonest or omitting of facts or any of that stuff. So those are the 2 greatest commandments. Now, Jeff, is that fair? I mean, you're creating a hierarchy for Torah. What's your case for a hierarchy for Torah? I'm indebted to Kaiser. I should pull this book out. This is the night for pulling books because I've spent a lot of my time here. But let me show you this. This is the 5 views on the Law and Gospels. William Kaiser has a section in here. Each of the guys react to the other guys. It's a little heavy, okay? It's a little heavy, but is it a worthwhile book? Yeah, you just got to kind of weigh it because each of them are going to sound pretty good. Actually, even though I'm dispensational, the guy I like the least is the dispensational writer in the book, which is kind of interesting to me. Let's look at the case we're going to form for a hierarchy because Kaiser does kind of state this. The rabbis themselves acknowledge some commandments are greater than others. The prophets emphasized the moral aspects of the law, and Jesus acknowledged a hierarchy in the law. So let's take a look at this. This is Midrash out of Jacob Neusser's Babylonian Talmud. Okay. I think it's Pia 1:1 through F. That's the way he sets it up. Okay. 2 things benefit of which each person enjoys in this life, while the principle remains in him, the world to come. Deeds in honor of mother and father, the performance of religious deeds, and acts which bring peace between a man and his fowl. But, now look at the underlined part here, but the study of Torah is as all of them together. Now, what did he just say? He just said that the study of Torah was higher than honoring your mother and father and all these other commandments. See, he's postulating a hierarchy in the law. Now, the rabbis are not our authorities by any stretch of the imagination, but it does not mean that we can't see that there's a hierarchy there and be aware of that. Okay? We will get to Jesus and the way he postulates. Not postulates, actually states there's a hierarchy. Pukeach Nefesh here, but you have Sanhedrin 74b, A and B. Sanhedrin, as a tractate, goes back to Jesus' time. One may break any commandment to save a life except the ones against idolatry, sexual immorality, and murder, 3 of the 10 commandments. Notice that. By the way, that's still a rabbinical dictum, that the other laws can be broken to save a life, including one's own, except for those 3. By the way, I don't consider Christianity or faith in Messiah idolatrous in any way, but that's where I would get some disagreement. So this is an interesting thing, and you may find this really interesting. Do you know where you will never find the 10 Commandments? In the Siddur. They're not in the Jewish prayer book. A lot of other laws, including the sacrificial laws, are in the Jewish prayer book. You would think that the 10 Commandments would be in the prayer book, especially because 3 of the ones you can't break, according to the rabbis, to save a life, are out of the 10 Commandments. So why aren't they in the prayer book? The real reason the 10 Commandments are not in the prayer book now is contained actually in the Talmud. And they were removed. They actually were a part of the synagogue service to where they'd be recited in the synagogue regularly. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shemuel, the sages wished to recite the 10 Commandments in the manner even of the provinces, but soon abolished them because of the argument from the Minim. I have heretics there. That's based on the source. That the 10 Commandments were the only valid part of the Torah. Now, the Minim are Jewish believers. So everybody used to recite the 10 Commandments, but the Jewish believers said that the 10 Commandments carried over, but not everything from Torah carried over. And the rabbis got exceedingly mad, and the sages, and so they removed the 10 Commandments from the prayer book. Isn't that interesting? So it was kind of a measure to discredit Jewish believers / temper tantrum on the part of the sages. There was no biblical reason to remove those. There was no theological reason to remove those. Okay? It was taught likewise in Berita. Rabbi Nathan said later he wished to recite the 10 Commandments. Okay. And then you have the same segment, but Rabbah, different name there, sought to reinstitute the recitation, okay, in the academy in Babylon, but this rabbi said to him, they already abolished the recitation because of the Minim. So there was even an attempt to restore them, and it was disallowed. Now, where did I get this? Well, this is Eisenberg's JPS Guide to Jewish Traditions, Jewish Publication Society, 2004, page 366. So isn't that interesting? Okay. And I seem to be missing a few slides here. Okay. Jesus gives a hierarchy to the law in Matthew 23. I'm going to grab my Bible and take you there. When he's giving a woe to the Pharisees and Sadducees, he indicates a hierarchy. And so I'm going to quickly turn there, and if you have your Bibles, it should be right in Matthew 23. And so we will just, there could be stuff taught that isn't in slides, right? The slides are a tool. So he's going to do his woes after he's cleansed out the temple. And he's going to talk to them. Okay. First of all, in 22, he states or has a lawyer, an expert in rabbinical law. Let's look at it. 22:36. Teacher, which are the greatest commandments in the law? Now, Jesus is asked point blank which the greatest commandments in Torah are. And he says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang the law and prophets. What did he just say? He just said the entire Torah hangs on the commandment to love God and love your neighbor. Now he's going to go to the woes in the next chapter. Notice that this is kind of organized this way. 23:23 of Matthew. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay the tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you should have done without leaving the others undone. Does Jesus state there's a hierarchy in the law? Well, yes, he does. He states very clearly in chiding them that there's a hierarchy in the law. The weightier matters of the law. Now, Strickland in the book, Four Views of the Law and Gospel, says, no, I'm sorry, it's not really about there being a hierarchy in the law. Jesus is just complaining about hypocrisy. Even though Jesus is complaining about hypocrisy, he is still stating things that are either true or false. The other thing is he has previously stated that the law and prophets, which would include the 10 commandments, hang on the two great commandments, and there is no getting around that. So both of them taken together shows clearly where Matthew is recording Jesus' teaching as coming from. And that's the idea that there's a greater and lesser in the law. Okay. Now, let's get on to this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I've done it in previous videos, and what I should do is start organizing the cards I put up, okay, so that you can have the videos that are connected, most assuredly, with the sections, okay? But we need to understand something. The very gathering of this material in Matthew, where Jesus goes ahead and sits the position of authority, it's where we get the term ex cathedra, because the word to sit is actually related to that word cathedra in Greek. He is sitting in the authoritative position with his disciples around, giving him their law, the Torah of Messiah, which is binding. Yes, he does so by contrasting, but when he says, I say to you, he's claiming authority. Okay? By doing that, he's telling the disciples what is required of them. Note that this section comes right before the section where he starts giving his law. Now let's go back to Matthew 5:17 through 20 and kind of plug this in and see how this all fits in. Okay? Because really we kind of jumped and we're in here and you might have forgotten where we're at. Okay? Do not think I've come to destroy the law. Jesus hasn't. He's come to give the superintending law of Messiah, the new covenant, okay? And everything still has to be fulfilled. Whosoever breaks one of these commandments, well, which commandments? Well, it can't be the Torah commandments because he hasn't listed them. Okay? These probably refer to the whole body of his teaching. Shall be called least in the kingdom of God, but whoever does them and teaches them shall be called greatest in the kingdom of God. At the very least, whatever these commandments are, they have to include Jesus' teaching. They can't be separate from. So everything from Matthew 5 to 7 and before would have to be included in these commandments. So it can't be Torah alone and Jewish custom forms. So Jesus expects us to perpetuate his teaching. By the way, that's what a disciple is. A Talmid or a Talmidah learns from his master, imitates his master, and teaches others to do the same. So it's only sensible that it refers to that. Jesus fulfills means he accomplished obedience to the law and lives out that obedience in us through union with him by faith, not through rule keeping. Do we see that? Do we see where that takes us? Our union with Christ allows him through his Spirit to live out the principles of the commandments in our lives. We're not in union with the law anymore. We're in union with Christ. Okay? Now, how do I know that? Well, it's not in the thing particularly, but let's go to Romans 7 and look at Paul's argument here. He does use law in several ways, but he's going to point to the way the law is fulfilled and whose authority we're under in relation to Jesus. Okay? Do you think, brethren, that I speak to those who know the law? The law has dominion over a man as long as he lives. Now, here, namas is used more generally because a woman is bound to her husband, bound by law to her husband as long as she lives. But if the husband dies, she's released from the law of her husband. Namas is used more generally here. So then, while her husband lives, she marries another, she's an adulteress. But if her husband dies, she's free from the law so that she's no adulteress, she's free to marry another. Okay? Now, we can't be talking about civil law here. Okay? It wouldn't make sense for Paul to say, you're not responsible to be a good citizen, when in Romans 13 he's going to tell them to be a good citizen. You died to the law through the body of Christ that you might be married to another, to him who was raised from the dead. That you should bear fruit when you were in the flesh, sinful passions were aroused by the law. Now, the law, there has to be a referral to the law of God as indicated in the Torah. It was at work in your members, producing fruit of death. Now you've been delivered from the law. The penalty of the law has been paid, right? You've been delivered from the law, having died to what you were held by, so that you should serve in the newness of the Spirit, not the oldness of the letter. The oldness of the letter of what? The oldness of the letter of the commandments. So it is our union with Christ. Okay? Our union with Christ, not rule keeping, becomes the means. Christ lives out the principle or spirit of Torah in us. There is a hierarchy. Jesus gives his disciples their moral obligations. He is the final authority. He is the Lord over his disciples. And he is the new Moses that gives the new law. And so he is very clear that he did not come to abolish the old law and simply lay it all aside, but rather he came to give the new covenant, which must include new instructions. Now, we're going to hit on that 2 weeks from now. That will be the evening before Thanksgiving. So if you're not around, I understand. Just know that that will be there. Okay? So fulfilled there has the idea of consummation, which is something I point out in my dissertation by accessing other authors who point to the same possible meaning. One was a dissertation that was done by somebody. Okay? Jesus accomplished the law keeping for us. We, in union with him, have our sanctification worked out. We are no longer seeking to be justified through rule keeping, for that isn't the point. It is our vital union with Christ which allows the real intent of Torah to be lived out. And the real intent of Torah is not simply keeping a bunch of mitzvot, as certain individuals and rabbinical Judaism would have us think. What does this mean about your practice as far as Jewish customs? It means freedom. Work out your practice of faith with God. I'm not here to tell you how to do that. I'm here to tell you what the greatest commandments are, and I'm here to tell you that it's your union with Messiah that allows the law to be lived out in you anyway. That's what I'm really here to tell you. And so as we look at this pericope, Jesus is making the transition from giving his Torah in the rest of 5 through 7, and then continuing on in the apostles, directing the churches, the communities, the assemblies as things come up. Okay? And the similitudes and beatitudes which describe the character that will be lived out as Torah is lived out in us. Okay? Someone asked where Talmud and Talmidah come from. It has the idea of disciple or learner. It doesn't, I believe, come from sheep. I'm thinking of a few roots it could come from. So that's the key idea. Jesus is going to introduce his teaching. It's going to be binding for the believers. He's already started to do it. And he superintends over that law of Moses and becomes the authority for the believers, giving his law, pulling some things in, but obviously, as Hebrews points out, some things are not pulled in. Love your neighbor as yourself and love God. And that's the basic thing. Is there a hierarchy? Yes, there is. Is Jesus authoritative for the believer? Yes, he is. Is Matthew, hopefully you better understand that pericope. I'm open to any sort of responses. Questions that came up, already one did, but if there are some other questions that come up, I'm perfectly willing to take them. I can't do the cool thing that Singer does where I actually bring you on camera. I've often thought GetVoke doesn't let you have a way to show the PowerPoints or screen. So I've not gotten that sophisticated yet. But I do want to go ahead and open it up if I've raised some issues or some questions that are burning. If there's some other things on your mind, we have a little bit of time here, and so I just wanted to open that up. By the way, if the pericope is short, it's because that's all God said in that section. And I really don't want to do two pericopes, especially when we're dealing with an issue this important. Okay. Well, as you're there, see, I can't do the wrapper thing. I ought to think about having some poetry ready. So, as you're sitting there thinking about it, I can go ahead and do something. But next week, we're going to deal with whether John's Christology is aberrant. And I may do another section as to whether John's eschatology or Christology is aberrant, part 1 in general, and then part 2. Talmud is spelled differently. Let's see if I can spell that for you. I'm going to go to my Hebrew keyboard and see if I can do this. I don't know that I can because the correspondence isn't all that great. I might be able to go to the Logos keyboard. No, I can't use the Logos keyboard. But it's a Tav. There you go. There you go. That's better. You have it up there. Talmidah. And so if you're looking for some sort of root there, um, no, it's actually Tav. So you would have tav, lamed. It's from the word to learn. For those who are interested, Talmidah comes from the word to learn. Okay. Uh, ya, 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 lad, yalad, yalad, which is the idea of learning, and the word Talmidah or Talmid. Talmid would be the male, Talmidah would be the female. Comes from the word to learn because a disciple is a learner. By the way, it works the same way in Greek. The word disciple has the idea of a learner. So that's where it comes from. Now that I look at the word, I can find the root. So you would go Yud, Lamed, Mem, Daled, for those who are real into Hebrew. Pronunciation. Okay. So, yeah, the problem I have is that the keyboard in English is a little harder to figure out with the Hebrew. So, that's kind of where we're at. Whereas the Logos actually goes with the letter sound. So, if I want the Vav, I would hit the V, corresponding phonetics. And so you can't do that with the thing. I actually have stickers. I've never put them on my keyboard yet. I probably should do that if I can still find them. But I used to have on my old computer. Right. Someone's pointing out Tav, not Tet. No, not Tet, Tav. Okay. But I could isolate the root when you put it up there. And so you have Lamed, Mem, Daled. And then you have the Tav. And Lamed, I believe, is the root. Has the idea of learner. I can actually bring Logos up here. Oh. And I might be able to. Wait a minute. Let me try something. Yep. I'm getting it. I'm sorry if I'm fiddling, but I'm actually pulling it. This is like a real complicated search. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not going to get that, but Lamad, I believe, is to learn. And so, or is related to learning. And you have Lamed, Mem, Dalid, and then you have the Tav, so the root would have the idea of learning. And I don't know why I threw the Yud in there. The root would probably be Lamed, Mem, Dalid. So anyone who's listening, sorry, I misspoke. I was trying to say Lamed, Mem, Dalid, and I did, I threw the Yud in there as if it was a form of the imperfect and did Yud, Lamed, Mem, and that wouldn't be right. And so it'd be Lamed, Mem, Dalid, and I was just trying to conjugate in my head. So apologies for those listening. Okay, well, that looks pretty good. Um, I'm going to let you guys go and probably join the family, but I'm thrilled we had a bunch of folks. And